Sometimes the person you think you left behind is the one who quietly builds a life beyond your imagination. Ryan Mitchell adjusted his tie as he stood before the enormous mirror inside his hotel suite. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline shimmered beneath the warm glow of a spring afternoon. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance below while guests arrived at one of the most prestigious wedding venues in Chicago. The event itself had nothing to do with him. He was not the groom. He was simply attending with his fiancée, Olivia Brooks. Yet the atmosphere suited the life he had spent years creating. Successful career. Beautiful relationship. Expensive city views. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Olivia stepped out from the adjoining room wearing an elegant emerald green dress that immediately drew Ryan's attention. "Ready?" she asked with a smile. Ryan nodded. "Almost." Together they entered the crowded ballroom shortly before the ceremony. Crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of guests while a string quartet performed near the stage. Conversations blended with laughter and the sound of glasses gently touching. The room carried the effortless elegance that accompanies people accustomed to success. Ryan greeted former colleagues and longtime friends. Several business associates stopped to congratulate him on recent achievements. Everything felt comfortable. Familiar. Predictable. Then something unexpected happened. While scanning the printed guest list displayed near the reception entrance, his eyes stopped on a name. Sophia Walker. For a brief moment, the ballroom seemed quieter. Not silent. Just distant. Like a memory suddenly stepping into focus. Ryan stared at the name longer than necessary. 8 years had passed since the divorce. 8 years since he watched Sophia walk away carrying little more than a suitcase and quiet dignity. Time had moved forward. Life had changed. Yet seeing her name unexpectedly brought back memories he rarely revisited. Olivia noticed his expression. "Someone you know?" Ryan smiled casually. "An old chapter." Olivia glanced toward the list. "Your ex-wife?" Ryan nodded. "Looks like she is attending." Olivia studied him for a moment before returning his smile. "Well, it has been a long time." Ryan agreed. A long time indeed. As the ceremony preparations continued, he found himself wondering what Sophia's life looked like now. He assumed it was ordinary. Perhaps she had remained in Portland. Perhaps she worked somewhere nearby. Maybe she had started over quietly. The truth was he had never tried to find out. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that the past belonged in the past. Across the ballroom, guests continued arriving. More names appeared on the registration list. More conversations filled the room. Yet Ryan's attention drifted back to Sophia's name several times throughout the afternoon. What he did not know was that while he stood comfortably surrounded by assumptions, fate was already moving someone toward that ballroom. And when Sophia finally walked through those doors, she would bring a reality so unexpected that every assumption Ryan carried about her life would begin to collapse. As guests continued arriving, Ryan tried to return his attention to the celebration, but Sophia's name lingered in his thoughts. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Sunlight streamed through towering glass walls overlooking Lake Michigan while white floral arrangements lined the aisle. Friends and family gathered to celebrate a couple beginning a new chapter together. Ryan sat beside Olivia, applauding at the appropriate moments and smiling during photographs, yet part of his attention remained elsewhere. Memories he had not revisited in years quietly resurfaced. When he first met Sophia, neither of them possessed much more than ambition and optimism. They built their early life together inside a small apartment where furniture rarely matched and every major purchase required careful planning. Back then, success felt simple. They dreamed together. Worked together. Believed together. Somewhere along the way, however, priorities shifted. Ryan's career accelerated. New opportunities emerged. Longer hours became normal. Business trips increased. Meetings replaced conversations. Success arrived exactly as he hoped, yet it demanded more of his time with each passing year. Sophia adapted for as long as she could. She supported his goals, encouraged his growth, waited patiently through countless evenings spent alone. Yet even patience has limits. Looking back, Ryan could remember dozens of moments when she attempted to explain how distant he had become. Dinners interrupted by phone calls. Vacations shortened by urgent meetings. Conversations postponed until tomorrow. Unfortunately, tomorrow often never arrived. The divorce itself had not been dramatic. No public arguments. No major scandal. Just two people gradually moving in different directions until the distance between them became impossible to ignore. At the time, Ryan convinced himself the separation was inevitable. Necessary, even. He believed both of them would eventually find happier lives apart. Over the years, that belief hardened into certainty. Sophia became a closed chapter. A completed story. At least, that was what he told himself. During the wedding reception, guests moved toward the ballroom for dinner while servers circulated through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and appetizers. Olivia joined a group of friends near the dance floor, leaving Ryan briefly alone near one of the venue's outdoor terraces. He stepped outside overlooking the lake. The city skyline reflected across the water beneath the fading afternoon light. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then he heard two guests speaking nearby. One casually mentioned that several high-profile attendees had not arrived yet. Another referenced a prominent business figure expected later that evening. Ryan barely paid attention. His thoughts remained elsewhere. He found himself wondering what Sophia might say if they crossed paths after all these years. Would the conversation be awkward? Friendly? Indifferent? More importantly, would she even care? What Ryan did not realize was that while he stood overlooking the water questioning the past, Sophia was already on her way to the venue. And when she finally arrived, she would not arrive alone. The woman Ryan remembered existed only in memory. The woman approaching the ballroom was someone entirely different. While Ryan stood overlooking the lake questioning memories from the past, Sophia Walker was preparing for the evening in a completely different part of the city. Inside a luxury penthouse suite high above downtown Chicago, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed miles of glittering skyline beneath the fading afternoon sun. Yet despite the extraordinary surroundings, Sophia's attention was focused on something much simpler. She stood beside a dining table helping her niece adjust a small ribbon on her dress before the wedding. Her movements were calm. Unhurried. The kind of confidence that comes from years of no longer needing approval from anyone. 8 years earlier, leaving her marriage had felt like stepping into uncertainty. There were difficult months afterward. Quiet struggles. Moments when rebuilding seemed impossible. But those chapters no longer defined her. Over time, she discovered something unexpected. Freedom often arrives disguised as loss. The woman who once measured her worth through someone else's attention slowly learned how to define it herself. Career opportunities emerged. Friendships deepened. Confidence returned. Most importantly, she found peace. The kind of peace that cannot be purchased, inherited, or borrowed. It must be earned through experience. As evening approached, Sophia stood before a mirror while a stylist completed the final details of her appearance. The elegant navy gown she selected reflected sophistication without excess. She had no desire to outshine anyone. After all, tonight belonged to the bride and groom. She was simply another guest. A guest who happened to carry a story very few people understood. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. The suite door opened and Benjamin Hayes stepped inside. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Not because of wealth or status. Because of the effortless warmth he carried wherever he went. Benjamin smiled the moment he saw her. "You look beautiful." Sophia laughed softly. "You say that every time." "Because it keeps being true." The answer was delivered so naturally that she could not help smiling. Their relationship had never been built on grand declarations. It was built on consistency. Respect. Trust. Things that often matter far more. Benjamin approached and offered his arm. Ready? Sophia glanced once more toward the city skyline beyond the glass. Somewhere across Chicago, Ryan was likely attending the same wedding. The thought no longer carried emotional weight. It simply existed as a fact. A chapter from another life. Ready, she answered. Together they left the suite and entered a private elevator descending toward the waiting vehicle below. Neither realized that their arrival would soon become the most discussed moment of the evening. Because many guests recognized Benjamin Hayes immediately. His name appeared regularly in financial magazines and business headlines. Yet no one anticipated who would be standing beside him. Especially not Ryan. And as the car carried them toward the venue through the glowing streets of Chicago, fate quietly prepared an encounter that would force the past and present into the same room for the first time in 8 years. The wedding reception reached its busiest moment just after sunset. The ballroom glowed beneath thousands of crystal reflections while guests gathered around candlelit tables overlooking the Chicago skyline. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed from every corner. The evening had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a successful celebration. Ryan stood beside Olivia speaking with several business associates when a subtle shift moved through the crowd. At first it was barely noticeable. A few conversations paused. Several guests turned toward the entrance. Then more followed. The reaction spread quietly through the ballroom like a ripple across still water. Ryan glanced toward the doors without much interest. Then he noticed her. Sophia stepped inside with effortless confidence. The years had changed her, but not in the way he expected. She looked calm. Complete. Not like someone trying to impress others. Not like someone seeking attention. In many ways, that made her impossible to ignore. The elegant navy gown reflected the soft ballroom lighting as she moved through the crowd. Her smile remained relaxed. Genuine. As though she belonged exactly where she was. Ryan felt unexpectedly unsettled. This was not the image he carried in his mind. He had imagined someone rebuilding. Recovering. Starting over. Instead, he saw someone who appeared entirely at peace with her life. Olivia followed his gaze. Is that her? Ryan nodded slowly. Yes. Before either could say more, another figure entered beside Sophia. Tall. Confident. Familiar. Several guests immediately recognized him. One conversation stopped mid-sentence. Another group exchanged surprised glances. Names began circulating quietly throughout the ballroom. Ryan noticed the reactions but could not immediately understand them. The man beside Sophia greeted guests warmly while moving through the room. There was nothing flashy about him. No attempt to command attention. Yet attention followed him naturally. Sophia and the man shared occasional smiles as they greeted mutual friends. Their comfort with each other was unmistakable. Ryan studied the scene from across the room. Something about it felt different from what he expected. Not because of wealth or appearance. Because of the connection between them. There was ease. Familiarity. The quiet confidence of two people completely comfortable together. One of Ryan's colleagues approached carrying a glass of champagne. He looked toward Sophia and her companion before smiling. I did not know they were attending. Ryan glanced toward him. You know them? The colleague laughed softly. Know them? Half the room knows him. Ryan frowned. Who is he? The colleague seemed surprised by the question. Before answering, he looked once more toward the man standing beside Sophia. You really do not recognize him? Ryan shook his head. The colleague smiled and lifted his glass slightly. That is Benjamin Hayes. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Yet Ryan needed a moment before understanding why. Across the ballroom, Sophia laughed at something Benjamin said. The scene appeared completely ordinary. But within the next few minutes, Ryan was about to learn exactly who Benjamin Hayes was. And once he did, every assumption he carried about Sophia's life would begin to disappear. The name settled heavily in Ryan's mind the moment he heard it. Benjamin Hayes. Suddenly, memories connected. Magazine covers displayed in airport lounges. Financial interviews appearing on television screens. Headlines discussing major acquisitions and philanthropic projects. Ryan knew exactly who Benjamin Hayes was. Nearly everyone in the business world did. He was one of the most respected investors in the country, a man whose decisions influenced entire industries. Yet what stunned Ryan was not Benjamin's reputation. It was the fact that Benjamin was standing beside Sophia. Across the ballroom, the two continued greeting guests with effortless ease. Nothing about their behavior suggested they were trying to attract attention. In fact, they seemed almost unaware of the reactions surrounding them. Several attendees approached Benjamin for brief conversations. Others greeted Sophia warmly. Ryan noticed something unexpected. People did not treat her like an accessory to Benjamin's success. They treated her as someone equally respected. That realization lingered in his thoughts. Olivia followed his gaze and quietly asked, "Do you know him?" Ryan nodded. "I know who he is." She looked toward Sophia. "And she knows him well." The observation sounded simple, but it carried a truth Ryan could not ignore. Eventually, the evening created an opportunity neither expected. During a break between speeches, Sophia stepped away from a conversation and found herself near one of the balcony entrances overlooking the city lights. Ryan hesitated briefly before approaching. 8 years disappeared in a matter of seconds. "Sophia." She turned and smiled politely. "Ryan." There was no tension. No bitterness. Just two people acknowledging a shared history. For a few moments, they exchanged ordinary conversation. Work. Travel. Mutual acquaintances. The years between them seemed surprisingly easy to navigate. Ryan found himself studying her expression. She appeared genuinely happy. Not performative happiness. Not forced confidence. Real contentment. "You look well," he said. Sophia smiled. "Thank you." She paused briefly. "So do you." Before the conversation could continue, Benjamin approached carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. His attention immediately settled on Sophia. "I thought you might want this." The gesture was simple. Small. Yet Ryan noticed something in the exchange. Benjamin remembered what she needed before she asked. Sophia accepted the glass with a grateful smile. Their familiarity felt natural. Comfortable. Built over years rather than appearances. Benjamin then extended his hand. "Benjamin Hayes. It is nice to finally meet you." Ryan shook his hand. Professional. Courteous. Yet internally, questions multiplied. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before other guests interrupted. As Benjamin and Sophia moved toward another group, Ryan remained standing near the balcony entrance. Watching. Thinking. Trying to reconcile the image he carried of Sophia with the reality standing before him. He once believed he understood how her story continued after the divorce. Now he realized he had understood almost nothing. And before the evening ended, one final revelation would make that realization impossible to ignore. Because Benjamin Hayes was not simply standing beside Sophia. He was standing there as her husband. Ryan remained near the balcony long after the conversation ended. Below, Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon. Inside the ballroom, music continued and guests moved between conversations, celebrations, and photographs. Yet his attention kept returning to one detail. Benjamin Hayes was not simply attending the wedding with Sophia. The way they interacted suggested something much deeper. There was familiarity in every glance. Ease in every conversation. The kind of connection that develops over years rather than months. Eventually, Ryan returned to the reception and joined Olivia near one of the larger guest tables. Several attendees were discussing charitable foundations and recent business developments. Inevitably, Benjamin's name entered the conversation. One guest mentioned a major educational initiative he had recently funded. Another described a community project supported by his foundation. Ryan listened quietly. Then someone casually added a detail that changed everything. "His wife deserves a lot of credit too," a woman said warmly. "Most people only know his business accomplishments, but she is involved in nearly every project." Ryan looked up. "His wife?" The woman nodded. "Sophia Hayes. Wonderful person." For a brief moment, the sounds around him seemed distant. The sentence settled slowly into place. Sophia Hayes. Not Sophia dating a billionaire. Not Sophia attending with a wealthy companion. Sophia Hayes. Married. The reality felt surprisingly different from what he expected. Olivia noticed the shift in his expression. "Are you okay?" Ryan offered a small smile. "Yes." Yet internally, he was processing information that refused to fit the narrative he had quietly carried for years. Somewhere deep inside, he realized he had always imagined himself as the one who moved further ahead after the divorce. Not consciously. Not maliciously. Simply as an assumption. Now that assumption no longer existed. Later in the evening, the bride and groom invited guests onto an outdoor terrace overlooking the city. Strings of lights illuminated the night while music drifted softly through the warm air. Sophia and Benjamin stood among a group of friends, laughing as they shared stories. Ryan watched from a distance. The more he observed them, the more he noticed something unexpected. Their relationship was not defined by wealth. It was defined by partnership. Benjamin listened when Sophia spoke. Sophia's opinions carried weight within every conversation. Neither appeared to overshadow the other. They stood side by side. Equal. Comfortable. Complete. At one point, Benjamin gently adjusted Sophia's shawl as a cool breeze moved across the terrace. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet it revealed more about their relationship than any public display ever could. Ryan remembered years ago when similar moments existed between him and Sophia. Before ambition consumed every available hour. Before success became something to chase rather than something to share. Across the terrace, Sophia happened to glance in his direction. Their eyes met briefly. She smiled politely. No bitterness. No victory. No attempt to prove anything. Somehow that made the realization even stronger. Sophia had not spent 8 years building a remarkable life to make Ryan regret losing her. She had simply continued living. And in doing so, she became someone entirely beyond the limits of his old assumptions. The evening was far from over. But for Ryan, the most important revelation had already arrived. As the reception continued beneath the glow of chandeliers and city lights, Ryan found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything except the reality unfolding around him. Every time he looked across the room, he saw Sophia surrounded by people who genuinely valued her presence. She moved through conversations with quiet confidence, never drawing attention to herself yet somehow becoming impossible to overlook. The realization unsettled him in ways he could not fully explain. Years ago, he believed he understood exactly how life would unfold after their divorce. He assumed their paths would separate permanently. He assumed the future would confirm the choices he had made. Instead, standing inside that ballroom, he felt as though he were seeing a completely different version of the story. Near the center of the reception, the bride's father began delivering a speech. Guests gradually returned to their tables while servers refreshed glasses and cleared dinner plates. Ryan sat beside Olivia, but his attention drifted whenever Sophia entered his line of sight. Then something unexpected happened. During the speech, the bride thanked several people who had helped organize a charity project connected to the wedding weekend. Among the names mentioned were Benjamin and Sophia Hayes. The applause that followed was immediate and sincere. Not polite applause. Genuine appreciation. Ryan noticed several guests smiling toward their table. One woman seated nearby leaned toward Olivia and whispered, "Sophia is amazing. She has done so much for children's education programs." Olivia smiled politely. Ryan remained silent. Another assumption quietly disappeared. He had spent years believing Sophia rebuilt an ordinary life after their marriage ended. Yet the woman being described by everyone around him was accomplished, respected, and deeply involved in meaningful work. Later, after the speeches ended, guests gathered on the dance floor while others moved toward the terrace overlooking the city. Ryan stepped outside alone. The cool evening air carried the distant sounds of music from inside. Below, traffic moved through the glowing streets like streams of light. He rested his hands against the railing and stared at the skyline. For the first time all evening, he allowed himself complete honesty. The feeling he carried was not jealousy. It was perspective. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing Sophia as an individual with her own future. He had frozen her inside his memory. The woman who left years ago. The woman whose story ended when their marriage did. Yet her story had continued. Flourished, even. The terrace door opened behind him. Ryan turned and saw Sophia step outside alone. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The city lights reflected in the glass behind them while music drifted softly through the night air. Then Sophia smiled. Not the smile of someone seeking validation. Not the smile of someone celebrating victory. Simply the smile of a person completely at peace with her life. And as she approached the railing beside him, Ryan realized their next conversation might finally answer the question he had been asking himself all evening. Not what happened to Sophia after the divorce, but who she had become. Sophia joined Ryan at the railing overlooking the city, and for a few moments they simply stood in silence. Below them, Chicago stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. Traffic moved through illuminated streets while reflections danced across distant glass towers. The view was extraordinary, yet neither seemed focused on it. Too much history stood quietly between them. Ryan finally broke the silence. "I have to admit something." Sophia looked toward him patiently. "What is that?" Ryan gave a small laugh. "When I saw your name on the guest list, I thought I knew exactly what your life looked like." Sophia smiled gently. "And what did you imagine?" Ryan hesitated. The honesty felt uncomfortable. "Something ordinary. I suppose I assumed you stayed in Portland. Maybe continued working. Maybe started over quietly." Sophia nodded. There was no offense in her expression. A lot of people assume things about people they have not seen in years. Before Ryan could respond, the terrace doors opened behind them. Several guests stepped outside carrying drinks. Among them was a well-known financial journalist who immediately approached Benjamin. The conversation that followed quickly attracted attention from nearby attendees. Within minutes, a small group had gathered around him discussing investment strategies, charitable initiatives, and economic forecasts. Ryan watched from a distance. What happened next surprised him even more. As questions continued, multiple people began directing their attention toward Sophia as well. One guest praised a scholarship program she helped create. Another referenced a community project she personally managed. A third described the educational foundation she and Benjamin had expanded nationwide. The respect in their voices was unmistakable. Sophia responded modestly, redirecting praise toward volunteers and team members whenever possible. Yet the facts remained impossible to ignore. She was not standing beside a successful man. She had become remarkably successful in her own right. Ryan felt another assumption disappear. Throughout their marriage, Sophia often placed her own ambitions second while supporting his goals. Somewhere along the way, he had unconsciously concluded that she would always remain in that role. Yet standing on the terrace, he was witnessing someone whose impact reached far beyond anything he had imagined. Then came the moment that transformed the entire evening. The bride's father approached the microphone inside the ballroom to make a special announcement regarding a new charitable partnership launched during the wedding weekend. Guests gradually returned indoors. Ryan followed along with everyone else. The presentation displayed photographs, accomplishments, and future plans. Then a large screen behind the stage displayed the names of the initiative's primary benefactors: Benjamin Hayes and Sophia Hayes. Applause immediately filled the room. Not because of wealth alone. Because of what they had accomplished together. Ryan looked toward Sophia as she stood beside her husband, accepting the recognition with characteristic humility. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle settled into place. The woman he once viewed through the narrow lens of their past had built a future larger than he ever imagined possible. And as the applause continued throughout the ballroom, Ryan realized the greatest surprise was not that Sophia married a billionaire. The greatest surprise was discovering that she had become extraordinary long before she ever met one. The reception gradually moved toward its conclusion as the city lights outside grew brighter against the night sky. Guests lingered around tables sharing final conversations while the dance floor slowly emptied. The celebration had been everything the bride and groom hoped for. Elegant. Memorable. Joyful. Yet for Ryan, the evening had become something entirely different. It had become a lesson he never expected to receive. Standing near one of the ballroom windows, he watched Sophia and Benjamin speaking with friends. The more he observed them, the clearer everything became. Their relationship was not built on appearances. It was built on mutual respect. They listened to each other. Supported each other. Celebrated each other's accomplishments without competition or insecurity. Watching them felt strangely familiar. Not because it reminded Ryan of what he once had. Because it reminded him of what he once failed to protect. Olivia eventually joined him near the window. She followed his gaze toward Sophia and Benjamin before smiling softly. "They seem happy." Ryan nodded. "They do." There was no bitterness in his voice. Only recognition. Olivia slipped her arm through his. "You know, not everyone gets a second chance to become the person they wish they had been earlier." Ryan considered the words carefully. They stayed with him long after she spoke them. Across the ballroom, Sophia excused herself from a conversation and walked toward the exit where staff members were gathering coats and arranging transportation. Benjamin soon joined her. The evening was coming to an end. Guests exchanged final farewells while photographers captured a few last images of the celebration. As fate would have it, Ryan and Sophia crossed paths one final time near the entrance. For a brief moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade into the background. "It was good seeing you," Ryan said sincerely. Sophia smiled. "You too." There was no unfinished argument waiting between them. No lingering resentment. Time had already resolved those things. Ryan hesitated before speaking again. "I am glad life turned out well for you." Sophia's expression softened. "Thank you." Then she added something he would remember long after the evening ended. "Life became better when I stopped worrying about what I had lost and started appreciating what was still possible." The sentence was simple. Yet it carried the weight of years. Benjamin approached beside her and offered a warm handshake before the couple prepared to leave. Moments later, they disappeared through the revolving doors and into the Chicago night. Ryan remained standing near the entrance, watching the city lights reflect against the glass. He realized something important. The greatest surprise of the evening was never discovering that Sophia had married a billionaire. Wealth was merely a detail. The true surprise was discovering the woman she had become. Confident. Accomplished. Peaceful. Entirely fulfilled. She had not spent years proving anyone wrong. She had spent years building a meaningful life. As guests gradually departed and ballroom lights began to dim, Ryan looked once more toward the doors where Sophia had disappeared. Then he smiled quietly and turned away. Some people leave your life and become memories. Others leave your life and become reminders. Sophia had become a reminder that the most remarkable transformations happen when no one is watching, and that the happiest endings are often the ones written far beyond the reach of the past.